Let's talk about finding the bigger goal of the study. So, in empirical studies, there's always going to be an introduction section. Sometimes it will have a little header saying introduction, sometimes it doesn't. In this particular article, it doesn't. And that section sets the stage for the bigger goal or purpose of the study. Like, why bother doing this study? How does it contribute to our broader understanding of the world? So there's some annotations in here about this. There's an extra video about generally finding the bigger purpose of the study. But I want to talk about in this particular study about tweens and advertising. So they open up and they say, in 2021, Common Sense Media, which is an organization that evaluates media for kids, documented a noteworthy milestone in children's media consumption. For the first time, U.S. teens and tweens were more likely to spend time watching online video in a given day than television. So the authors are setting the stage, like kids are watching a lot of online video. One form of video content that's popular is unboxing videos, and they explain what this is. In the style of video, that there's a host reviews the toy by opening the package and demonstrating its features. And then they talk about how unboxing hosts can become well-compensated influencers, paid or otherwise compensated for marketers in exchange for favorable reviews. So they talk here about Ryan's World, which you probably are aware is a really famous example of a kid who did toy reviews and made a lot of money. And so they tell us here at the bottom that because this is a situation where someone's being paid to talk about a product, that legally that is supposed to be regulated by the Federal Trade Commission. There's a rule that sponsored content needs some sort of sponsorship disclosure, but the authors tell us in practice, a lot of sponsored videos don't actually make this disclosure. So it's supposed to be regulated, and the regulations aren't being followed. And this is a really popular format. Okay, so that's how they open. And then they talk about kids' understanding of advertising. Now, this is a thing that there are decades and decades of research about kids and advertising traditionally, like TV commercials. Like, we know, for example, that by the time kids are 7 or 8 years old, and the authors tell us this, they understand what a commercial is, for example, and that ads are meant to sell things. But our authors point out that online native advertising, which is this advertising that's kind of presented as if it's entertainment content, and it's embedded within stuff that's resembling entertainment, is different. They're kids might not recognize that an unboxing video's broader intention is to sell them something. Okay. So for example, if we think about traditional TV, right? A kid's watching a cartoon and then a commercial comes on for a toy. For example, there used to be a rule, I assume it still exists, although kids don't watch normal TV anymore. There used to be a rule that if you had a cartoon of strawberry shortcake on TV, you couldn't have ads for or featuring strawberry shortcake during the commercials because little kids would be confused about what's the show and what's being sold. So you couldn't have strawberry shortcake being hey, buy this thing. Because they were worried about this. So, so you can imagine that there's some concern about this sort of different kind of advertising, this native advertising. So this is interesting. Okay, so they continue talking about this stuff, and then they go into some stuff that we know about how kids, little brains and adult brains too, process information when we are engaging with advertising. So they talk about schema theory, that basically people organize knowledge and information into mental schema, and that impacts how they process new information. If you know, for example, that something is in class is going to be tested on, your brain processes that differently than some sort of thing you're engaging with that you're not going to be tested on, right? Or if something's a commercial, your brain's going to process it differently than it would a TV show. They also talk about the persuasion knowledge model, and that is how people, kids, adults, etc., when they're consumers, they detect and respond to persuasive intent. So they kind of set up explaining this sort of thing. So yeah, but back to the point about talking about the bigger goal of the study. The authors build a layered argument. Hey, this thing is common. Kids are watching a lot of online videos. this sort of unboxing video is pretty common content. And this kind of content is kind of concerning because without like disclosure of sponsorship, especially, it can be misleading. And we have some laws about how these videos are supposed to be presented, and and the sponsorship is supposed to be presented, and a lot of people don't comply. We know a lot of stuff about traditional ads. We don't know how this kind of works within like an online and this sort of like unboxing format. So it's important to be able to set up. And it's kind of the same pattern that we see in the Sharenting study in terms of the setup. So if I was trying to answer a question saying, what is the bigger goal, the bigger purpose of this study? I would say something like, kids spend a ton of time watching online videos, and some of that content is trying to sell them stuff, kind of in a subtle or vague or sneaky way, even. We know how kids process traditional ads, but we really don't know how kids are processing these unboxing videos. They don't look like ads, even if they are. Also, tweens, like this particular age of like, whatever it is, 11 to 14, now I can't remember, whatever they said it was. They're at a particular developmental moment where they are capable of detecting if it's a commercial or not, but they might not be really good at it yet. So the goal of this study is to figure out if kids can perceive sponsored content differently than non-sponsored content, and also could some media literacy training help? Okay, so that's kind of the bigger picture. So imagine that you're not talking about the hypotheses or the research questions. It's like, what was the point? What was the goal? If you walked away from this study, you're like, what did this add to our societal knowledge? That's what we're talking about here.